So join me in welcoming Marilla. So the format for today will be in conversation, then we'll have time for questions towards the end, and Vera Deakin has kindly agreed to officially launch the book here in Newcastle. So the format of the book, for those who haven't seen it, it's a very hefty, lengthy book. It's very dense in primary sources, in letters. It's a real entanglement, I think, of personal lives of these three feminist writers of the 20th century. It's taken a long time to come about, but to ask, I guess, a bit of a cheeky question, why has it taken so long?
Okay. Well, I guess I should go back to the beginning, to Gladys Gow, my English teacher at Newcastle Girls High, who lent me Southern Steel, which is first edition Southern Steel, well worn, that awakened my interest in Cusack. Because Dimphner managed to get the North family down to a T in the Sweetapple family living at the top of town. It was a book that encapsulated the ethos of Newcastle. The grandfather from the coal mines up the Hunter Valley, the dad who bicycled his way back and forth to tech and got his degrees in engineering, ended up at the steel works, going around the world for the country, just like Sweetapple does in Southern Steel. And so that set my antennae. Fortunately, I was working for the Film and Television School in the mid-1970s when Julie James Bailey, who was Florence's daughter, Florence of the collaboration Come In Spinner, and she had funds from the Women's Film Fund to investigate whether or not the book Come In Spinner would be valid as a film. Was it going to be of interest to the marketplace? Now, I, for my sins, by that stage had spent 5 years being imbued with the advertising industry and trained as a real chip little market researcher, going around proving to doctors what drugs they should prescribe and all that sort of stuff. And so I had a fair amount of social justice work to make up for, and Julie seized on it, and I got the job of running the study to prove that Come In Spinner would make a very viable movie. And it was a fascinating period of time. It sent me to almost every bowling club in Sydney, and it got me doing film tests of a film that was out at that time, No Names, No Pack Drill. I don't know if any of you remembered seeing that, but we cinema tested it with little meters to see when people were excited or not excited by the World War II content. And we proved, of course, definitively that Come In Spinner was going to make a really great film. Well, that was 1979, and that was the year I first met Dimphner and Florence. I sat at their feet with a group of other women filmmakers from the Film and Television School, and we quizzed them on what it was like to collaborate on a book together. Two women collaborating was not wasn't high on the stakes. It was so hard for women to get into print at that stage in a very male-dominated, British Empire-dominated book industry, that to have two women share the credit was even harder to imagine, but they did, and they gave us a wonderful, empathetic sight into their very close friendships since university and the path they took in collaborating to write Come In Spinner. Now, Come In Spinner was essentially Dimphner's story. She lived it in King's Cross during the Second World War, when the family owned a property that, when she got there to caretake it, turned out to be a front for a brothel. And not a very big front at all. It was quite an obvious front, and it was right next door to Sidey's Baccarat school as well. So she got to learn the underbelly of King's Cross pretty quickly. And she was the experience on the street side, but then, of course, she suffered what she didn't know then, but she learned later, was from multiple sclerosis. And that multiple sclerosis slew her down in 1944. She was pensioned out of the Department of Education, told she would never work again. And the residual of that was a terrible symptom called trigeminal neuralgia. And that's those three nerves on either side of the face. And they just pierce in shooting pain. Sometimes she'd get it for as long as 3 months. So she was severely debilitated and would be for the rest of her life. And I think that's the thing that Dymphna taught me most, and that is that whatever goes wrong, you get in there and you keep on persevering, and you can even put severe pain to the back of your mind if you've got something you're creating in the front of your mind. And that's how she wrote for the rest of her life. Florence was her amanuensis initially on the project of Come In Spinner, but of course ended up being a fully blown collaborator, having her set of favourite characters that she kept writing up. And in pleasant collaboration and a bit of competitiveness, they pulled off this fantastic book. So that's the beginning, that's 1979. But it keeps on going on. Go on, Anne.
I'm interested to know, because you knew two of these writers personally, when you came to research and read letters, look at all their archives, their collections,
their private lives,
how much of that personal connection and how you knew those women, did that contribute to the way you interpreted that archival material from an historian, I guess, sort of
having no blood connection, as it were? Yeah, okay, good question. And I think the best way to answer it is to say that when we sat on the floor at Abbotsford in 1979, literally at their feet, and taped them and were in awe of them, I didn't know that Dymphna wasn't going to live for another 24 months. Florence would live for another 24 years. And I think that's the balance that I had to make sure I maintained through the whole telling, because Dymphna wasn't there to get her words in anymore. And that's what led me, I think, partly to making her letters my next 20-year quest, because literally I went out and sought those letters in every archive in Australia, United States, Russia. I went to Russia in 1995, and from friends and people who collaborated with her in London, it was a worldwide search to get the sort of same weight of Dymphna as I had daily, and luckily, and I'll never forget it, of Florence James. We spent the next 11 years and more. That was just the first 11 years was on Come In Spinner, till we got it into a mini-series. And yes, I sat through the making of that mini-series with Florence and saw her looking at the first final edit on the little machine in that thing they call a TARDIS at the ABC, and saying, very softly, she said it, "I wish Dymphna were here." Because she just couldn't believe that it had finally come, because that book was so suppressed by Australian government they had to take it to England to get it published. But that's another story. The next 10 years I then spent, after Spinner became the miniseries on the ABC, which is still brilliant and alive today. If you can get it on Amazon or somewhere, it's worth trawling there around. I then spent the time sitting at Florence's feet, literally, while she went through her tea chest, which was about that high, full of letters and memorabilia and everything that her life back and forth from England to Australia needed, a sea chest that big to carry with it, all the paperwork of a lifetime. And so I sat at her feet while she sorted and we dated and got it ready for going into the State Archives, which is where it is now. So that's why it took so long, because I had such long involved relationships with Florence. Then I went to Wollongong Uni and did the MA Honours thesis, which got a bit of reception out there at that stage. And Paul Sharrett, my then supervisor at Wollongong University, said, "North, you've got to do a biography." And so North did. But it was a lot more travel until it finally has taken this shape, with, as Anne said, with the first attempt out at UQ in 2001. But this is the full thing, and this is a very different thing than that first draft, as I call it, back in 2001, because I've had my husband Robert, who's been an incredible encouragement to go and do what I set out to do in the first instance, which was to write 3 books, a trilogy of her life, which are interrelated. And so this sets out now to interrelate with Volume 2 and Volume 3. Volume 2 is nearly finished. In fact, it was nearly finished when we thought we were getting the rights back from the University of Queensland, and we thought we'd be able to tweak it a bit and reprint it. There was nothing to get back. They had not saved the digital archive, which I am still very public about, because I think it is a dreadful disrespect to authors not to save the backlist, especially when the amount of work, that was like 28 years at that stage, had gone into that sort of work. And I'm not the only one that's on that backlist who has had to do what we then did, Robert and I. We had a publisher who optical scan recognitioned the book, OCR, which is what you see on Trove. Any Trove correctors in the room? Ah, welcome band, good. Well, you know what it's like then. Okay, the whole book was like that. And so 3 proofs later, we had read it 3 times by that stage, and we knew how flawed it was. And so we set about for the last year and a quarter actually totally re-researching and rewriting it. We've got a wonderful genealogist in the Blue Mountains who also has access to the Mormon Church's international database, which is wonderful. And we had Anne, we call her Sherlock. Anne went in and corrected every fact that needed correcting and double-checked those that were right. And we rewrote the book completely, and it's now at our fingertips to go back to the nearly finished volume 2. And I say our advisedly, because you don't write a book by yourself. It takes 2 people, even if one of them's in the background and quiet, which Robert certainly wasn't. Robert was pushing all the time to take it to the limit in terms of making sure that we had the best information to hand on to the future, because as far as I'm concerned, this is my life's legacy.
And yes, so thank you for that great response.
Lengthy.
The book is very factual. I think having the skill to curate and edit letters, that it brings out that honesty that reflects all the authors, that they were true to what they were writing about, and it was very documentary. That the method they used, one of the quotes was, why don't we tell the truth through fiction? So they were almost like documentary makers.
Oh, totally.
And their research, do you want to comment on how they undertook their research?
Yeah, Dimphna has had a gift, a photographic memory. The notes she did take were very scattered and very messy, and if you look at her archive, it's a bleeding mess, to tell you the truth, in many respects, except of course for the letters, which are rushed off automatically. She never took well, she did when she was overseas and Norman was doing the typing. Norman was a bit like Robert. He made sure it was all neat and tidy and the spelling mistakes were corrected. When Dimphna was handwriting fast, there were no spelling corrections, there was nothing. There was just what was coming from there to there to there. And those letters are so fresh and so absolutely intimately show you the ethics that drove this woman. And that's what I guess really is stuck it to me like glue, because she seriously fought for other people. She seriously put herself on the line for any social injustice that she saw out there, whether it was a cleaning lady not getting a proper pay at Neutral Bay Intermediate High School, which there was. And guess what? Her file shows very clearly that Dimphna got her pay back to her right back in 1927. And it was that sort of, terrier zeal to make sure that people didn't suffer unjustly from a bureaucracy, a political party, especially a church. And she'd have been right up there with Joanne McCarthy if she'd have been alive today. She quite seriously put herself on the line, as ill as she was at many times, to bring social justice to an individual or to a cause, such as her most important one, which was the anti-nuclear, anti-war cause.
So they wrote, but they took it to the next level, didn't they? So they took it to a social, political level. I'm just interested in the collaboration and research they undertook to write Coming Spinner, and some of the places they went, people they spoke to.
Thanks for reminding me where we started with that question. Yes. Yeah, Dimphna lived it because she lived in King's Cross for a year. We won't say it very loudly, but with Xavier Herbert at the time. And she saw it at her front door. And she helped rescue some of those young girls, some of those underage girls that had been dragooned into prostitution because the Americans liked them young during the Second World War. And she lived it. I mean, it's a simple fact. She really lived it on the streets. Florence learnt about it because Florence had a very good job during the Second World War. Florence was the public relations and publisher for the Royal Prince Alfred fundraising public relations outfit. And so she was running balls at the Metropole and the Australia Hotel, and she was learning about the other side of it, what was happening with the rich, and how the grafters and the politicians, the arms industry and the black market all worked as one, which is the most unusual thing to say about Sydney, isn't it? But between the two of them, they had a lot of lived experience. They then, when they got up to Pine Grove, they rented a cottage on Valley Road, Pine Grove, which is still there today. It's been renamed from Pine Grove to Four Winds, because that was the name of the children's book that they practiced on. So they set to seriously with a goal to write a book to tell the truth about the corruption of Sydney and the corruption of Sydney-siders during the American occupation, as it was called, in the Second World War. And they planned it very carefully. They set it in, and this was no accident, Labor Day weekend, October 1944. During the Friday to Friday, they divided the days up into 3 parts, and they settled on characters. They developed characters by putting photographs and then by putting cutouts of their clothes, their car, where they'd live, all sorts of visuals right down the length of the hallway at Pine Grove. And they had a visual map of Sydney and of their characters that they could talk to each other about as they brought the incidents alive that they wanted to tell. And they were incidents that they'd all lived. There isn't one bit of this book that hasn't been lived. And they then set to, or Dymphna in the first instance, set to dictating. Florence was her amanuensis. She wrote and then typed while Dymphna slept. Dymphna never left the bed for like 2 years. She was absolutely an invalid for the first 2 years up at Pine Grove, 1946, 1947, till she had to come down to Sydney to have all her teeth out, because at that stage they thought that the pain was bad teeth, which of course it wasn't. It was the trigeminal nerves, but that took another 30 years to diagnose to know that one. So yeah, she was in many ways a victim of the inadequacy of Western medicine at that time. Because I have to tell you, when she did go to the Eastern Bloc countries, they were much further ahead on neurological diseases in both Moscow and in Peking. And she had a lot of help and a lot of relief from her diseases when she got to those countries. But that's a long time afterwards. Back to the moment, when they were writing that book together, they ended up sharing the information, sharing their experiences. It began as Dymphna's book, it became both of their book. And the Mayor of the Blue Mountains, who I'm quite proud of, he came to Pine Grove, saw their dilemma, and he got them the council dictaphone. That's what's on the cover. That's the dictaphone that Tom Walford got them, and he then lent them so that they could work faster. His 2 typists, so the ratepayers of the Blue Mountains have heavily subsidised Cummings Spinner. That should be a lesson to our own councillors to subsidise local writers. You get your name mentioned at Writers' Festivals if you do that.
So I guess as women writers, they had a lot of struggles. So, they were resilient in doing their research, doing their writing, but then getting over the hurdle of perceptions of women particularly in the 1930s and 40s, when it was predominantly a men's world. And predominantly a male, Australian-only male, publishing industry. Miles Franklin, I guess, having to change her name to Miles. Lots of help from it, yeah. Miles was a mentor to Dymphna since 1938. Whereas the wonderful anecdote that they rehearsed until we believe it's totally true, they met each other sitting on the pond, on the rim of the Lily Pond in Government House at the 1938 sesquicentennial garden party with Lady Wakehurst for prominent women. And as you can tell by the tone, that's exactly what they thought of it too. And they sat on the pond, and even though they rubbed shoulders at a few Fellowship of Australian Writers, of which they were both prominent members and advocates for other writers, they'd met, but they hadn't clicked sparks, which is how Miles referred to how they took to each other in friendship. They threw sparks off each other, they sat on the pond and said, "This is a heap of you know what are we going to say about it? Have you ever thought about collaborating?" said Miles. "No," said Dymphna. And she said, "Well, I have, and we're going to do it." And they did. They spent the next 6 months running between meeting places at railway stations and over the telephone, handing each other bits and pieces of chapters until they'd collaborated on this incredible satire of the sesquicentenary and social climbing as an industry in Sydney that they called Pioneers on Parade. So from 1938, Dymphna was pretty well learning from Miles Franklin what it really was all about out there. She'd lived a pretty safe life in the high school system, even though she, took on the minister up the coalfields, as you might remember, in 1938, about not giving free school milk to kids who had rickets and all the diseases of malnutrition because of the strikes and the depression.
Dimphna learnt from Miles' history, Miles' generational battle. Of course, that's why she's Miles. She pretended she was a man when she put in her first manuscript to George Robertson of Angus and Robertson. Henry Lawson unfortunately blew the cover when he took it to England and got his publisher in England, and she was very lucky to get an English publisher because that guaranteed her that she'd be treated seriously in Australia evermore. But Miles had also gone to Chicago and taken the battle for the vote to the American women. Miles informed the Vote for Women campaign in the United States of America. That's how significant she was in world politics, this tiny little woman who refused to ride side saddle on the farm but mustered the sheep riding normally on a horse. Yeah, Miles was the inspiration, I think, that brought Dimphna over the line. The word radicalised is a word that's become a bit unpleasant these days, but she certainly politicised Dimphna's social justice agenda and her conscience. Miles also was the woman who organised the American delegation to go to The Hague in 1915, in which women from all over the world came together to work out an agenda whereby women could generate world peace by forming international networks that could lobby governments. And that was called WILPF. Anyone here a member of WILPF? Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. It is alive in the peace movement in the Hunter. There's, some very good women who are keeping it alive up the Hunter. But it's gone a little bit quiet, but as we can see in America, it's being recharged.
So I guess Miles was a mentor, being the eldest.
Yeah.
She understood people in the country.
Yeah.
She had spent time...
Remember, Dimphna was a country girl too.
Yeah. Knew the impact of the Depression in the 1890s.
Yep. She had
the impact that had on children in areas like Broken Hill. She sort of spent time down there, so she understood issues to then pass on that knowledge.
Yeah. And as we say about our heroes like Vera, we stand on their shoulders, and she stood on Miles Franklin's shoulders. And they were pretty small but pretty feisty shoulders to stand on. But Dimphna definitely did, and Florence too.
Yeah. And I guess I like in the book how you bring out the other characters, the other players, and I guess in any network, people sort of need like-minded people for support. So that's where I think the whole web of letters is very complex. You mentioned Xavier Herbert. There's other people that are mentioned.
Facilitated
Christina Stead.
Christina Stead's in there, but only a little tiny bit. Chris didn't get the social conscience like they got. It was like an infectious disease. Once you've got a social conscience, you want to pass it on and you want to bring other people into the network. Chris Stead didn't get into that network, but she certainly wrote some brilliant books and certainly opened the European ears to Australian voices, which was a very important job to do. But Dimphna, more so than any of them, except for Miles. Miles knew how to drag someone along and get them onto the cause. In fact, her father made her a suffragette. Miles Franklin's father fought for the vote for women in the late 1990s and through into 1902. So he was a very important man in her life. And like Miles had a lot of male mentors. She had the editor of the Penny Post in Goulburn, who read her very first manuscript, which is about kings and queens and castles, and said to her, "My dear, write about what you know." So she went home and wrote My Brilliant Career. So Dimphna had similar mentors. In fact, she was very lucky in 1928 when she was at Broken Hill, and she'd written an absolutely amazing play, which has never still seen the light of day. It's one of my missions to get that play out there. She wrote a play about strike and about the clash between capital and labour in the very primitive working conditions in Australia in the 1930s. Like, the men were down the mine and there was just so many prop falls, so many whistles that blew, so many dead men, so many disabled men with no legs, no arms in Broken Hill. She couldn't believe it when she saw the reality of Broken Hill. And her students in her classrooms all had, as she said, the diseases of malnutrition, broken teeth, lank hair and rickets. And she knew that that was because of the great strike of 1918, 1919, when the men held out for 2 years. Families lived with no income for 2 years, living on rabbits and whatever they could get from the mammalian life around Broken Hill, which wouldn't have been very much. And she wrote this play, and she sent it back to two of her mentors. There was George Arnold Wood, the Professor of History at Sydney University, whom she loved greatly and who has influenced so many generations of Australian historians. George Arnold Wood needs to be brought back to life today too. He was amazing. And there was also Charlton, who was the editor of the Sydney Mail, who commissioned her first articles, a fabulous one on Broken Hill that says just the sort of stuff I've just told you. And quite a few others. It was Tasman Lovell, the first professor of psychology at Sydney Uni. There was Tom Much, who was the Minister for Education at the time. There were all these fatherly men. She collected fatherly men who treated, because she was very small and very thin and very, very vibrant. Norman Frieda, when he first saw her, called her a white flame of a girl, because she entered the all-male bastion of the press club in Sydney and demanded to see Mr. Friedel. Mr. Much has sent me to see him. So she got in. And he was absolutely blown over, Norman Friedel. He was not only the president of the press club, he was also a founding member of the Communist Party of Australia, and he was also Packer's leading finance journalist. He travelled a very thin line, did Norman, his whole life. And he was blown over by Dimfna, and he was blown over by her play. He said it was strong, meaty stuff with a motif of Aboriginals. And the Aboriginal motif is a chorus in the background right through the play, who sing a lament for the convicts, for the Aboriginals, and for the ground-down workers who are effectively slaves to the corporations. So it was a wonderful play, not to have seen the life of Dave. There were any play producers around, please talk afterwards. And Norman then figured as her major mentor. He read everything she wrote ever since. That was the first play. They were friends for quite a long time before they became lovers. And in fact, in the middle of the year, I'm launching a little book of Dimfna's only surviving 10 poems, her love poems, and the 4 poems to Norman that we've rescued from the bottom of boxes and all sorts of places. They testified how important he was as a mentor in her life.
What's the name of the play, please?
The name of the play.
Strange Victory. Strange Victory. Yeah. So I copied it and it's scanned. If you want me to scan it to you, give me your... Yeah, pleasure.
So the 3 authors have had a huge impact on Australian society, Australian women, encouraged a lot of women. But what do you think, their agendas back then, are they as relevant today? And what values, are, I guess, influential in supporting societies? And
their major agenda was against war. Dimfna lost her 2 uncles and her dearest cousin a year older than her in the trenches of France at the end of the First World War. It was ingrained into her brain what war did. It took the people you loved the most. It was useless. It served no purpose. It was a tragic waste of a generation of young men. That's what was firing her blood right from the outset. Of course, Miles thought exactly the same too. She'd lived through, I think, 3 wars by then, Boer and the rest of them. And she had a son, she didn't, she was a virgin her entire life. She had a nephew, her younger brother's son, who came back with what was then called shell shock, we now know it as post-traumatic stress disorder, from the Second World War, and who unfortunately made Miles's last 15 years very, very sad years. They shared, Florence of course too, Florence walked with Bertrand Russell for all the Marston Marches in England, but that Dimfna had left England by then, was on the continent. But when Bertrand Russell geared up the anti-war, anti-nuclear, it was because of all the bases that the Americans had populated Britain with at the end of the Second World War. They were all over England. The farms were being encroached by these planes that came in, stopped the cows milking, of course, like daylight saving, but they came in with nuclear weapons to bring as their gift. And so the 3 of them were absolutely solid and unified on anti-nuclear, anti-war, and pro bringing together the ordinary people between countries so that you weren't meeting and thinking of a demonised, foreign devil, Chinese, Vietnamese, whatever in the world. You actually knew these people as people and could approach what their policies were being funded by government with an open mind. And that open mind was opened to different by Norman again in an incredible book published in 1933 at the beginning of the rise of Nazism, and it was called The Bloody Traffic by Fenner Brockway, and you can still get it on Amazon and on the internet. I'll say it again, it's called The Bloody Traffic by Fenner Brockway, and it is a clear expose of the arms government interactions and collaborations that led to World War II, and it's no bloody different today. It really isn't. There's a line from Southern Steel that I say to bring this point home when I was studying through it the other day, and I read it to Vera, and she agrees wholeheartedly. It's saying exactly what we've got with us now. It's two of the characters, Jummer and Hoppy Sweetapple. Sweetapple, by the way, is a Cox. So if you're looking for who the Sweetapples were, begin with the Coxes in the Newcastle phone book in 1942. Lots of things don't seem possible when they happen to somebody else. Then before you know where you are, they're happening to you. That's right, Hoppy says. Remember how casually most people took it when Mussolini bombed the Abyssinians and the Germans bombed Guernica? Then Pearl Harbor, and now us. Now, of course, just before Newcastle was bombed back in 1942.
Thank you for the reading. And I think, you know, all the literature that's been written is a historical source as well, isn't it? Like for people to understand that it's as relevant today
And
as
it was
it was when it was written.
and lived.
Yes. So look, thank you for answering those questions.